You start with something very vague like smart shop floor or digital thread or digital twin or autonomous driving. And then you break this down into 16 blocks and say how much of these 16 blocks should be built versus bought. And if bought, do you buy software? How much should this cost? How much are others paying for this? What are benchmarks in the market? What's the reality versus hype? That's where we come in.
A single business decision can have an outsized impact on your company, especially if your company is a giant enterprise. Tech leaders need to be able to find and source inventive enterprise solutions, and ISG is the place to start. My guest today, Prashant Kelker, is the Chief Strategy Officer and a lead partner at ISG. It's a global tech research and advisory firm, and it consults over 80 companies in the Fortune 100. According to Prashant, his prior experience on the other side of the table, Accenture, has given him a wealth of useful insights for his current role. Tune in to hear more about the fascinating advisory process at ISG and why Prashant calls the firm the industry's best kept secret. IT Visionaries is brought to us by Salesforce Platform. If you love the thought leadership on this podcast, Salesforce has even more meaty IT thoughts to chew on. Take your company to the next level with in-depth research and trends right in your inbox. Subscribe to a newsletter tailored to your role at salesforce.com/platform. Welcome everyone to another episode of IT Visionaries, and today we have a special guest. You're going to meet Prashant Kelker. He is the Chief Strategy Officer of a company called ISG. That stands for Information Services Group. Now, I got fired up when I learned about this company because we checked it out. We looked it up. It's publicly traded. It is an interesting company. Listen to this slug. The practice of ISG advises more than $20 billion worth of digital and technology spend every single year over the last 20 years, and they advise 80 of the Fortune 100. That sounds insane. Prashant, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Albert. Yeah, and I guess probably we are the industry's best kept secret. So, when
Yeah.
when $20 billion go through our fingertips, we find ourselves on the advisory part of this. And think of us as having one leg in sourcing and the other leg in digital technology and strategy.
We've heard of a lot of the big consulting firms. Of course, most people have heard of Accenture, Deloitte, and they've heard of these big companies. There's no question about it. I don't think that's a secret. What is unique about ISG? If you could start there, like tell our audience, because I think a lot of our audience has probably been your customer or you've worked with them, but give us an idea of like, hey, what is ISG? What does it do? And like, we'll kind of walk through like how you got there, because this is going to be fascinating how you can oversee a practice that can, because we looked at some of the things that you guys are advising on. For example, we've just started like a Web3 practice group. And I'm thinking to myself, like, Web3 just came out. Like, how can someone be so so versed in it that they could actually give advice? You know what I mean? I don't
I
even
know
know
what
what
you
it
mean.
is.
Right.
But why don't we start there? What is ISG? What do you guys do? And then talk a little bit about yourself.
Sure. If you look at that $20 billion, and this number is growing year by year. So last year it was 19. We guess next year it's going to be 22. So all of this tech spend is, as you're right, it gets spent on the Deloittes, the Accentures, Infosys, Wipros of the world. It also gets spent on the SAP, Salesforces of the world. But all these decisions have to be taken and structured and contracted. So how do you do service design, structure, and contracting at the same time? You can only do it with someone who knows what they're doing, and now comes the but has no conflict of interest in implementation.
Like a consumer reports almost of technology. Like, right,
There you
that's like
go.
the how they work is
Yeah,
they say, hey, we don't take ad dollars, so we don't
yeah,
owe anybody a good review.
exactly. So think of us as consumer reports sitting on the other side of the table of a Fortune 100 before and during their talk with Accenture, Deloitte, SAP, and Salesforce. These are just examples.
In general, like a massive implementation for anyone who's listening who's not from a big company. If you're in an enterprise buyer seat, you already know how this game works. If you're not in an enterprise buyer seat, let's put it this way. Every decision at scale is a massive one. You're talking about, even if it's something small, like someone's like, hey, I want to install Slack. Slack's $8 a user. Okay, it's not a problem, but Slack for a 400,000 person firm is a big problem. Or it's not a big problem,
Yeah,
but it's a big decision.
it's a big decision.
Give us an idea of how you in your company kind of, because you have to know something about everything in order to make a recommendation, right? You can't go in it blind, like, oh, that sounds good. You
Yeah,
know what I mean?
right. So
Give us an idea of how you do it, how you go about learning about these technologies, how they work, how you get your information.
So a lot of us have spent time on the other side. So I'm ex Accenture, by the way, just by way of example, right? So we've all spent our time on the other side, and we tend to think of ourselves as player coaches. We were
Hmm.
players, and now we are coaches. So we are a niche firm. We are 1,300 people managing this to
Hmm.
$20 billion, and all of us have seen such transformations in the past. And it's never just about technology. It's about people, process, and technology, and how this triangle comes together in terms of design and in terms of commercials. So we bring
Yeah,
this
and
together. You start with something very vague like smart shop floor or digital thread or digital twin or autonomous driving. And then you break this down into 16 blocks and say how much of these 16 blocks should be built versus bought. And if bought, do you buy software? Do you get someone like Accenture to come and implement this for you? Or what mix thereof? How much should this cost? How much are others paying for this? What are benchmarks in the market? What's the reality versus hype? That's where we come in.
yeah, so how do you go about collecting this information to help make these recommendations? Because you mentioned certainly there's experience, right? You mentioned you guys have all sat on the other side of the negotiating table before. You've probably got some team members that have implemented these technologies or seen it implemented or directly at project leads on some of these. But how do you generally collect your information? Because like a big company investment in technology is not quite like, our earlier example, consumer reports. Consumer reports, I can buy a car, drive it around, right? Like that's easy. But implementing something across 1,000 employees is very hard. No one's going to let you test that on them. You know what I mean? Like you got to
I know.
know, or you've had to either done it.
Yeah,
So how do you gather enough information to make a good recommendation?
that's a great question because there are two sides of this question. The first side is, let's call it the buy side or the demand side. And that's about understanding what a Fortune 100 is trying to do versus, and that's the more important part, what are the others doing? What are the others doing and how far are they and how are they going about the exact same topic? We're taking patterns from retail and consumer goods and applying it to automotive and vice versa because they have the same issues, right? Sales and after sales is sales and after sales. So we start looking at how these large programs get structured, sourced, and commercially contracted. We bring that experience into one program. And think of this as the demand side, or how does one structure something like that. The other side of this is the supply side. So since we don't implement ourselves, the tech platforms of the world, the system integrators of the world stay in constant touch with us and keep us up to date on what they are seeing, right? So we are like the spider in the net, Albert, right? So we're getting it from all ends. We are the David of this company, helping the Goliaths talk to each other.
Yeah, give us an idea, like an example. I know you probably can't disclose too much without being exact. If they can, that'd be perfect because then we could get a concrete idea. But give us an idea of like maybe something you've helped advise on that dramatically was transformative. Give us something like maybe a big success story or maybe a de-risking story. That's just
Hmm.
as important too.
Hmm.
Like not doing the wrong. I've seen like by the way, I've seen like huge
Yeah.
disasters. If I recall, like this was a big one, which was when the federal government launched the My Pyramid
Yeah.
food pyramid. I think it was your old company. I think it was Accenture, but like there was like a lawsuit because it was like, hey,
Yep.
you guys spent way too much money to do this. It didn't work out. Because it's you already know this. When the stakes are that high, a big mistake is so
Yeah.
massive.
And everybody tries to stay out of those headlines. So you're right, Albert. So
Yeah.
you're right. I can't give you a story from right now. So let me do something else. Let me take a story from 3 years ago, and I can't tell you with whom this is. So it's a large
Yeah.
premium automotive firm,
Okay.
and 3 or 4 years ago, autonomous driving was still magic. It's a little more structured now, but it was magic then. You
Hmm.
didn't know what you would buy, you didn't know what to buy, and you didn't know what to build. All you knew was a car driving itself was actually machine learning. But how much is it? How much is source code, and how much of this is sensors, and how much can a car do on its own versus talk to other tech platforms was not solved. So we got brought in by something very tactical. The car company called us and said, we are trying to structure service level agreements. with this tech platform. And we said, yeah, sure, we can help with that. What services are you trying to get the service levels is for? And the question we got back, what do you mean services? It's like, oh, what are you designing for? Autonomous driving. I said, do you have a service description for autonomous driving? Of course we don't. Like, okay, so how can you have a service level if you don't have a service description? Because no one's done this before. I said, okay, so do you have a nail it and scale it philosophy? Are you in nail it or are you in scale it? Oh, we're nailing it. Ah, so you're co-creating. So you don't have a service description. Yes, we do, but we don't know how much to buy versus how much to build. So you see what happened is we went from something like service levels right up to strategy because you don't know what you're structuring in buy versus build. So we had to start back from the scratch and say, okay, let's take a step back and see what are we trying to do. Get a service description for autonomous driving, which at the end turned out to be machine language. And sorry, not machine language, machine learning. And getting the data out of a car from a test track, and that's like petabytes of data, back into a
Yeah.
data center. Forget about cloud, because you're getting petabytes, and then you got to extrapolate that 300,000 times to see how you can teach the algorithms.
So how did you and your group begin to advise on this? Because as you hinted at earlier, there really weren't that many companies, or were there already a lot of companies exploring this? So you knew that this had to be done, or did you have something to reference, or how did you know, for example, that they had
It
examined
was
these
so
things?
new that no one else had done it, or if they did, they were not sharing it. So we go with this
Sure.
like we would do with anything else. You use the intelligence which is already in that Fortune 100 firm. It's just lying in pockets and silos. It's lying with engineering, it's lying with manufacturing, it's lying with sales. It's also lying with the tech platforms and the tech vendors. So the muscle you bring to play is how do you get to a service description on paper? You got to take multiple constituents, see what they have, and see how this comes together. So a lot of this is joining the dots based on experience. And once you connect the dots, you start seeing,
Gotcha.
okay, if you got now the atlas of the world, who can do what? And sometimes it's not just a tech platform, it might be a startup. And if there's nothing existing and something is deemed core to an enterprise, they would want to do this on their own. In which case, they would need a system integrator who does it for them in the beginning and then build, operates, and transfers it to them. So there are so many commercial models of how this can pan out, Albert. That's where the magic lies.
How do you go about collecting all this information? Because like you said, it's broken apart across the organization. Like when you sign an engagement, do they allow your team members to just interview everybody and start collecting this information, or is this done? Like, I guess, how does it done? Because I do know from doing large scale software implementations. I've been a part of a bunch in my past. The number one thing everyone seems to be very concerned about is their employees' time. So like we did a social media management platform back in the day, and Hilton Hotels was our customer, and they wanted everyone at every hotel to have access to it. And they're like, training can be done in like needs to be done in less than 30 minutes. And you're like, what? It's like
Yeah,
this is how much that's how
yeah,
much they were willing to allocate on a
yeah.
per hotel basis. I was like, that doesn't sound like a lot.
I know, right?
they they don't want to
Yeah.
give up much time. So
Yeah.
how do you go about collecting all this
It's a
info?
great point because I think the mistake most organizations do is they start with either a technology or a trend in mind. So, like, let's go to social media, and
Okay.
you start the call with Web3. Let's go do something in Web3. That's probably the wrong way to go about things. Uh, the way we do about it is we hatch or hitch onto a business goal that the company is already trying to chase. So, staying with my automotive example, they would be going after connected after sales, which is a thing. It's like, what can I sell to Albert after I've sold him the car? Now, maybe what I can sell Albert after I've sold him the car is if the car is smart enough to realize Albert's driving towards the Rocky Mountains. The car says, "Oh my God, this is getting colder and colder, and the elevation's going high. He's going to the mountains." What if the dashboard says, "You know what? What if we could sell Albert a conditional insurance for the next 6 hours for $13.99 only?" That'd be
That'd be
creepy.
creepy.
Creepy, but you might click on that. You might
Yeah.
click on that, and then you're insured for the next 6 hours. And when you're back to where you are, it's done. You're not you just paid for an insurance. Now, who owns that? Is that Prudential or is it Ford?
I don't
Yeah,
know
right,
who's
right,
servicing the
right. So,
policy.
and then Ford is set up to take payments of $35,000. Are they set up to pay 1399? Can you pay for 1399 today using a dashboard? Do you know the complications going behind that? Payment platforms, right? So, right, so
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's a lot because like like your signal could
yeah,
drop. You just said I'm in the mountains, like I get a blank signal, which means I won't get a
exactly,
success
right.
confirmation. I don't know if I've paid
And
or if
and
I've
s-
not paid. There's a
and
lot
then
of
you
things
start
that are in
seeing
play.
the things you need to do, and you say, "Oh my God, if that's what it costs," you start getting sticker shock. So you'd rather much start with saying, conditional insurance sounds interesting. What's that worth? How many Alberts are there? And
Okay.
do we know our customers, or do I only know our vehicles? Do I know the connect between my customer and vehicle? How much do you think we can make in this year? Should we start in Denver first because you have the Rocky Mountains there? Should we roll out then slowly? Should we go to the Northeast? How do we nail this first? What's the business case? Can we think in budgets in an agile way instead of in a yearly way? Can we be agile instead of doing agile?
Hmm. As you're talking about this, I was just thinking to myself like, would I've ever bought this? And this is a little off subject, but like yes, last year I drove my son to Buffalo through a snowstorm in Pennsylvania. 100%. I think if the conditions were so bad, like we were questioning would we make it. We were like, maybe I would. They were like, "Do you want to up your life insurance policy right now?" Done. I'm like, I don't know. It was pretty crazy. Like I was thinking to
Yeah.
myself, like, dude, this is insane. But then I'd also be, if this was an actual technology, I'd be suspicious too. It's like, if I
Yeah.
say no, will it try to kill me? Like, oh, decline, and then it just drives itself off the cliff. I'm like, oh, geez, that sucked. But your point, like, I agree. I think a lot of businesses have
Mm.
hypothesis like, hey, I think that this is a market worth exploring, or I want to know more about this market. You hinted at it. At the time, it wasn't that they wanted to invest in social media. They kind of already knew customers were um, on social making requests for services. And so the question they were trying to answer was like, is it possible to even collect all this feedback? Because they knew that, like, for example, hotels are a great example because a hotel, if you have a service problem, really a call center cannot help you, right? Like if the bed is dirty, like wait, what's the call center going to do? It's like, I need someone on the ground that's going to clean that. And so that was kind of the hypothesis. But to your point, companies all the time have questions. Like I'll just phrase it as this: questions and hypothesis of new markets they can open, new technologies they can implement to possibly take advantage of a market, but it may not be a strategy. So when does ISG get involved? I mean, there has to be a budget line item. They must know they're willing to like allocate some budget to get the question answered before they hire you. Like that's got to be how it works. Give us an idea of like the process, because it sounds like by the time they call you, like they're very serious about knowing the answer to a question.
Yeah. And you're right, because they would have spoken to a McKinsey or a BCG or a Bain, and they would have laid out the strategy. Very likely this has happened in a June or July. Very likely this has shown up in the October strategy session of that firm. Very likely this has landed in the budgeting for the next year. Very likely someone walked out of a December
Hmm.
meeting with a goal in January to get it done. That's where we come in. We come into the how. We come into the how of techno commercial strategy. So think of us as we start where a McKinsey and BCG stops. We would also stop where an Accenture and Deloitte
Hmm.
starts.
So it's that time frame. It's like, hey, these are the proposed solutions. Before I say yes to anything, let me get another person to evaluate these plans.
Evaluate these plans and also match this against what the others are doing in the market with similar providers with similar problems. At what benchmark price? Uh, how much of these mark to market could go into evaluation of whether that business case is true or not?
Were you part of the team that discovered this market?
No, I wish I was. So I'm standing on the shoulder of giants, Albert. Yeah, so think of me as second generation in this firm. So this firm started in the 80s in Texas. So from folks who had left IBM and CDC. And they discovered this market in managed
Hmm.
services. So if you remember, in the 90s, offshoring and outsourcing was a big thing. They jumped on that trend and said, okay,
Hmm.
how can we create big deal structures and establish themselves as third party advisory and sourcing? Now we've come a long way since because the world has gone more complex than let's just get,
Yeah.
company XYZ for the next 6 years to manage our data center. I'm second gen.
How did you find out about it?
I was on the other side. So before I was with this firm,
Of an ISG evaluation?
yeah, so I was at Accenture, so I'm ex-Accenture. So I was on the other side doing all of this and responding to all these very interesting topics coming up. And I'm like, who is behind all of this? And it was ISG. And then, of course, I got headhunted out. And there's been no looking back. So I've been with this firm since 2012.
You're sitting over or among all these different companies looking to invest in new markets, new technologies, and so on. What are you and ISG team members seeing, like, let's say, interest in? Like, what are companies like really wanting to understand
Yeah,
more? Because you guys sit in this really interesting realm. Like, you kind of know what's
yeah,
you kind of have a window into the future because before anything can be done, it has to be paid for.
yeah.
And before anything's going to be paid for, it sounds like it's going to be evaluated. So, what are people looking to evaluate? Give us some broad things that are going to happen in the next, you think, like, 2, 3 years of where investments of big companies are going to be making.
Sure. I think let's start from the bottom. And there might not be words for what I'm saying, what I'm going to describe now, but I think these words might come out in the future. So if you look at the world of storage compute, and it went from data centers to the three hyperscalers, and now all the talk is about public cloud and how can you move to cloud and how can you migrate to cloud and what are cloud strategies. I think this was okay 3 years ago. Most clients have figured that out. So we are seeing now actually something new. I don't know what to call it. We're seeing storage, compute, cybersecurity, edge, 5G, and IoT come together. Because if you look at it, most computation till now is done on what I call the carpeted flow. It's happening within companies, within the corporate office. Even when you say ERP, it's literally running inside a data center. It's still running in a corporate office. But things outside in the world, be it on concrete floors, on grass, on highways, off highways, are getting increasingly connected. So when they get connected, they go live. When they go live, you have just changed the perimeter of your security. Suddenly, you're much more vulnerable than you were. Suddenly, cybersecurity came into play with a connected thing. What's a connected thing? It's actually IoT. You see how cybersecurity and IoT came together, except you just left your storage and compute back in your data center. What's connecting the two? It's cloud, public cloud. So storage, compute, IoT, 5G, edge, and public cloud suddenly came together. What's the new word for it? I don't know. We started calling it SICE, Secure, Intelligent, Connected Economies.
I tongue twisted myself. In my mind, I called it perimeterless.
You're right. You're exactly right. Because I think the world's going from just solving for IT, so information technology, to solving for OT, that's operational technology. There's a lot of devices which are going to go live. There's a lot of dark data which is yet dark. It's going to come to light. And then I think there's going to be a brand new substrate forming, a substrate for the connected enterprise. We got to design for that.
Interesting. Because I was actually thinking about the challenges that, because my son right now is traveling abroad with his grandmother and he's in Europe. And I think everyone's read, if you haven't read the news, Europe's having a hard time, right? America's having a hard time. Europe's having a much harder time. And I was thinking about how, like, what you just said, how that very much so probably applies to like the airline industry. So if you take an airline, they have like central HQs and hubs, but their planes are all over the world. And then when they get to their locations, the ground staff, they rely on the ground staff also to help the customer, right? So in the case of luggage is always my example. Like, but these are subcontractors. Like the luggage handlers, sometimes they work for the airport. They don't work for the airline. And so they have, you would need like, I'm imagining their handheld systems have like, there's now integrated systems of security, like you just said, where it's like who's traveling, who are they with, what property do they own. And
Oh,
I,
you
I mean,
bet.
there's a
Oh,
reason
you bet.
why so many bags are
Yeah.
now currently being lost. Like they just can't. The systems are breaking down, and you lose the people. They didn't enter into the system. Now you're making a call to a
Yeah.
customer service agent, which might also be outsourced, and they have no clue where your bag
I
is.
know. I'm
And
one of them.
that's why people are sticking Apple tags
I'm
on
one of
their
them. Yeah.
tiles on their bags. They're like, I mean, that's just one industry, but I think other industries, like you're suggesting, are becoming just like that, where their workers, their property, is probably, like you said, it's all coming online. The transportation industry makes the most sense the quickest, but it's going to be like, or I guess Amazon logistics is actually a great example of this, because the driver
You're
all the way
right.
to HQ probably knows what's on that truck.
And you raised a great example. So, who should solve for this? Should United solve for this, or should Denver Airport solve for this, or should FedEx solve for this, or should Zebra, whose devices are scanning all of this, solve for this, or should these four solve it together?
I don't know, because the customer's going to call the airline.
That's the complication of all of these, because every company is smart enough to know what they do on their own. But I think the world is going away from strategies and planning to actually conversations. So how many of these conversations between these four are you actually tracking as a firm? Or are you planning in your little cubicle, in your silo, in your ivory tower? How how do you know that what you just put together painstakingly over the last 9 months is not already being done out there in a conversation? How do you know that FedEx is not talking to Denver Airport and you're United? You don't know. So I think the world's going away from planning to tracking conversations. And the minute you start tracking business conversations, you start looking at what are ecosystem value chains. In this case, airport, airline, logistics, third party logistics, and scanning devices, right? So ecosystem value chain. So you start looking at these
Yeah,
conversations and say, now you just got a little bit of bandwidth. You can't track every single conversation. You got to decide, how do I listen? Because listening is like listening on Twitter. You can
that's
listen.
right.
You might choose to engage in a few conversations where you say, oh man, I
Right.
think I want to influence that one.
Yeah. And if I was like the last mile logistics company that actually brings your bag after we find it, there's no way I want every airline to know every package that's going through all my systems. Like that's not how I want to operate either. Like they need to know there's like some level of privacy. Like you're only looking at what you're looking at. It's pretty fascinating. I was thinking of another industry as you were talking that has this is starting to, I would say, buckle. I don't know how it's going to happen, but like delivery logistics, because a restaurant, which can be a chain restaurant, but if I'm a franchisee, like if I'm a
Mm-hmm.
McDonald's franchisee,
Mm-hmm.
I can put my restaurant on Uber Eats, DoorDash, whatever other delivery service. There's probably more, right? And like there's the new
Mm-hmm.
rise of gig workers like rejecting orders. So who's at fault? I mean, because if I'm the franchisee and I make this order, I expect to be paid. Like there's no,
Exactly.
you
Yeah.
didn't pick it up, I don't care. Yeah, I made it. You pay me. Right? So there's going to be, I think I see like that collision that's happening right before our eyes. So like, is that like a kind of problem? Like, I guess someone will have a hypothesis to solve this, and they're like call you up, like they get some bids and like, Prashant, figure out which one of these is possible to solve.
True. Or it used to be that way. It used to be, hey, we got these three bids. Can you just help us choose? Now we start shifting a little more left. It's, hey, this is this business problem we are trying to solve.
Hmm.
Can you tell us who else is doing something similar and what are they doing
This is the problem. Okay.
and with whom are they doing? So we are the how company. We are much more the with whom company. Think of us as the matchmaking and discovery engine of enterprise buying technology. That's who we are.
Are more companies starting to think like, hey, I need to verticalize? Like, because Amazon's verticalized, right? It's my where it's your goods in my warehouse. It's my delivery drivers. And if you want food, it's in my grocery stores, right? Like they'll fulfill from Whole Foods, right? And they're gonna, if you want medicine, it's gonna be from my hospitals, One Medical.
Verticalization is a trap. Verticalization is a trap. So I'm going to get in trouble for what I'm going to say now, Albert. So look at, like, you're right, Amazon is verticalizing. So what does this do to Amazon Web Services? Do you think a retail company would host its stuff on AWS?
They say they don't look, but I do know. Yeah, I saw a bid. I was as a software vendor. I saw a bid at Sam's Club, and it said if your it asked if your solution was hosted on AWS. They wanted to know.
There you go. And you start seeing, right? So you can't be a platform and a threat at the same time. So you got to decide, am I competing with my client or am I serving my client? Now, I don't want to bash AWS, it's a strategy. And there are lots of other firms who use AWS, but you can clearly see retail is off AWS.
Yeah,
So there's the positive and the negatives to verticalization. So that's why you got to start
yeah,
looking at
they
these
moving off.
platform models very, very carefully. It's everybody is going under, hey, let's go be the new platform. Even ISG would say, instead of me saying we handled $20 billion of spend every year, I could describe myself as we are the platform of enterprise buying technology. But platform is, I think, is a misused word. By the way, there's a great book which has just come out called The Platform Delusion. I forget the author. Lovely book.
I love it already because I can't tell you how many times we're like, we're a platform. It's like, I got to build on you too. Like, do you know how many platforms there are out there? Like, if everyone's platform requires me to build on their platform, what's the difference between just having single instance software?
Right. And I think, you raised Web3 at the beginning of the call.
That's because I just don't really know what it is. I mean, I see it all the time, and people try to explain it to me. I'm like, there's no arbiter or central owner of things. So there's not a central owner of things. There's also no arbiter of things. But in my life, I feel like I need an arbiter. I need someone to say this is right and this is wrong, and this is how the transaction will go down.
Right, Albert, I guess you're a cynic like I am. So, right, I get the entire decentralized part of Web3, the philosophy part. I think we're heading for I call it a re-centralization, not de, but re-centralization. So I think there'll be definitely new players. So how many players do we need in this industry who'll manage digital identity? One, three, 200, 7,000. I don't know, but it's not 7,000. So, I think there'll be some amount of re-centralization. So I think what gets interesting in Web3 is not so much the decentralization, but the fact that Web3 is a protocol-based world. In a protocol-based world, you start going from platforms to protocols. Protocols are powerful. HTTP is a protocol. It gave us the internet. SMTP is a protocol. It gave us email, changed the way we work. So protocols are very, very powerful. And Web3 is much more of a protocol world, and it is a back-end world. Like Web2 was a front-end world. It was social media. Web3 is solving for the back end of the world. So as you go from platforms to protocols, that's where I think the decentralization happens. If you're now tracking protocols instead of platforms, you're saying, okay, I don't make a choice between one of six platforms. I make a choice between thousands and thousands of protocols because I can bring something to life just by joining the dots across protocols. You just went faster in your implementation, but you have to develop a new muscle, and that is protocol scouting. That's what's waiting for us.
I love it. I love it because this is a nice reminder to myself to figure out how to make money outside of tech very soon. We're getting we're getting to the point where we're like, I don't know what's happening. I remember like watching my mother like try to program something on a like an appliance, and she was like blown away. I'm getting there. This is where I'm at that point where I'm like, damn, like if I don't take a job like yours where I'm like learning stuff more often, I'm in trouble because right now I'm learning through like conversations. I need to go deeper because if I'm not willing to go deeper, I need to get myself a power washer. I could just be a power washing guy. I'm gonna be good, right? I'm gonna be good, right? Because this like we're talking about 6,000 protocols I gotta know now. Like, come on, man.
Right, right. Or you develop a muscle for constantly tracking new protocols, right? So that gets us into interesting discussions because now you don't know how to take buy versus build decisions. The world just got more complex.
Listen, you blew my mind away. I'm sure someone listening is just saying like, "Oh, I totally understand what Prashant's saying." Like, and if you are, yeah, give Prashant and his team a call. ISG, like everyone else, is hiring for more skilled labor and talent for sure. Prashant, I want to say thank you for joining us today on IT Visionaries. Thanks for sharing a lot of what you do. But before you go, it's actually time for my favorite segment, which is the lightning round. The lightning round is brought to us by Salesforce platform. It's the #1 cloud platform for digital transformation of every experience. It is a platform. Prashant, this is where we ask you questions outside of the world of work so our audience can get to know you better. You ready?
Sure.
What's one of the craziest problems you've had to solve in your career? And it doesn't have to be at ISG. Like, what's something that someone brought you to your table? You're like, dude, I don't know what you're trying to do.
I think it's the one which we just started with, the autonomous driving before they could spell autonomous driving. That was the craziest problem because we didn't know whether this was a commercials, contracting, service description, or a technology problem.
They're just like, hey, we want to do this. And you're like, no, I don't know how to start. Who is your technology IT hero? Like, who you look up to? Like, man, this person is so smart. They figured out all the solutions.
I still worship Steve Jobs. I know, he comes as a flawed. There's flaws, but who doesn't have flaws? But I still worship him.
Any particular reason why?
He put it out there. He shaped the world. He didn't ask the world what they needed, he shaped it. He could describe in very simple terms what he's trying to do. He focused Apple on what they should not do instead of what they should do. He lived the word simplify.
My favorite story, and I'd love to hear yours. My favorite factoid or story about Steve Jobs was the fact that before Apple, he wasn't actually into technology at all. In fact, he was trying to raise enough money to go, I believe, to India to like find himself and do a lot of weed. When his neighbor was like, "I'm selling these motherboards." Well, how much are they worth? And he's like, "Oh, well, I could sell that and make some money, so I can get enough money to make this vacation happen." And he then fell in love with, of course, the technology. But like people don't realize, like he wasn't that guy growing up loving tech. Like that was Woz, really. He learned to love it, really.
Yeah, yeah. And did you know about the Florence story?
Remind me.
So, okay, so he also spent time in Florence in Italy. And if you go to the medieval villas in Florence, at the doorstep they have a stone. So each doorstep the threshold of each door has one particular stone, and I forget what it's called. It's Pieta or something in Italian. And he asked what that is for, and he said it's because when you're crossing the threshold, you're crossing into a new world. And that's the time I think Aldous Huxley also brought up the dose of perception. And if you look at Apple stores now, all of them have that gray flow. That's where it comes from. He was taking also ideas from Florence, from the Medicis, from the Renaissance, back into Apple stores.
Ah, I do remember that. Okay, so now I'm remembering that chapter because I do remember, like, yeah, people were kind of taken aback. But not only did he run a lot of the technology influence, but he was very adamant about the look of the Apple Store. And his dad was a carpenter, I believe. Like he was very much into like how things were made. Prashant, I want to say thank you again for joining us. Thanks for sharing a little bit about yourself. It was awesome having you. Listen, ISG is a really interesting company. I don't know how you got into this field, but man, it sounds like, I mean, I do know now because you told me, but this is such an interesting field because it does make sense. Like when there's the deal sizes on the line here are so massive, companies are doing things that really, like you said, they're not really done before. It helps to have a third-party provider. The only thing I'm still puzzled by is I still don't know how to become so knowledgeable that my advice would be welcome. That's
Oh, Albert, in a sense, we do what you do. You said you learn through conversations. We do the same.
Hey, thanks for watching. Subscribe to this channel for more great IT thought leadership. And thanks to our partners at Salesforce Platform for making this show possible. Go to salesforce.com/newsletter to discover timely insights and useful tips tailored to your role.